In 2025, American farmers relied on Canada for 87% of every kilogram of potash fertilizer they applied. Remarkably, all of it came from a single province, Saskatchewan, mined from 6 underground operations tapping the same Devonian-era salt formations laid down 900 million years ago when a shallow inland sea covered central North America. Imagine the scale: 87% of every bag that nourished Iowa's corn, Illinois' soybeans, Nebraska's wheat, Idaho's potatoes, and Texas's cotton originated from this single Canadian region. The entire industrial-scale agriculture of the American Midwest, the Plains, and the South depended on one critical mineral, produced in commercial volumes nowhere else in the world. The United States Geological Survey confirmed these numbers in March 2025. For the farming and fertilizer sectors, this was hardly news. The USDA had monitored reliance on Canadian potash since the 1960s. Agricultural lobbyists had testified in Congress repeatedly about this dependency. Yet, it blindsided the administration of Donald Trump. In March 2025, the White House imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods, potash included, as part of a broader trade war agenda. The announcement came with full political theater, prompting the largest single-issue lobbying effort by the U.S. farming sector in recent history. Senators from the corn and wheat belts, including Chuck Grassley of Iowa and John Hoeven of North Dakota, alongside the American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Corn Growers Association, the Soybean Association, and the Wheat Growers Association, all sent urgent messages. Governors of farm states joined the chorus. Every major agricultural organization warned that the potash tariff would inflict immediate, measurable, and politically disastrous consequences on the very economy the administration claimed to defend. Within 72 hours, the administration slashed the potash tariff from 25% to 10%. Within a month, potash was granted exemption under the USMCA entirely. What had begun as the most aggressive single commodity tariff escalation was reversed in less than 5 weeks. That brief period in March and April 2025 marked the moment Trump attempted to replace Canadian potash and discovered in a highly public way that no substitute existed. Yet this was only the opening chapter. By November 2025, the cost of trying to replace Canadian supply had become politically unbearable. On December 8th, the president simultaneously announced a $12 billion emergency aid package for American farmers and renewed the threat of very severe tariffs on Canadian fertilizer. The farming press immediately recognized the contradiction. The aid existed because tariffs had already disrupted the supply chain, while the new threat highlighted that no alternative supply could fill the gap. The joint announcement revealed a failed strategy being relaunched. The numbers explain why alternatives were impossible. Canada produces around 14 million tons of potash annually, nearly all from Saskatchewan. Nutrien, headquartered in Saskatoon, is the largest single producer, selling 14.4 million tons in 2024, more than any other company worldwide, surpassing Russian, Belarusian, Israeli, Brazilian, and German producers combined. Saskatchewan holds roughly 1.1 billion tons of recoverable reserves. By comparison, the United States possesses about 200 million tons spread across New Mexico, Utah, North Dakota, Arizona, and Michigan. None of these deposits exist at industrial-scale production or match Saskatchewan in cost efficiency, geological depth, mining infrastructure, rail logistics, or export terminal capacity. The reserve ratio favors Saskatchewan 5-1, while annual production is 36 times higher there. This is not policy-driven. It reflects ancient geology. Devonian salt beds deposited 900 million years ago. The United States cannot replace Canadian potash because the mineral simply isn't there. The Trump administration explored multiple strategies. One approach targeted domestic mining acceleration. In 2024, the Department of Energy under the Biden administration had offered a loan guarantee of up to $1.26 billion to the Michigan Potash and Salt Company for a solution mining operation in Oyola County. The state of Michigan contributed hundreds of millions more, and federal permitting was fast-tracked once Trump took office. When operational, the mine would produce roughly 800,000 tons per year, a fraction, about 7%, of American demand, with commercial output not expected before the early 2030s. Utah presented another domestic option. Sage Potash, a Canadian firm, received a $14 million USDA grant in 2025 to study a 300,000-ton project, representing approximately 2.5% of U.S. annual demand. Construction and feasibility studies would span multiple years before production could begin. The administration also pursued an international path. In December 2025, Washington negotiated with Belarus to lift sanctions on state-owned potash exports in exchange for releasing 123 political prisoners. The aim was clear: open Belarusian supply channels to create structural alternatives in the global market. Yet Belarusali had been under sanctions since 2020, making this a risky and unproven strategy. The potash saga of 2025 illustrates a stark truth. A single Canadian province dominates the mineral essential to American agriculture, and geopolitical maneuvers, domestic projects, and international deals cannot quickly or fully replicate that supply. The United States faced a choice between dependency, costly interventions, and the political fallout of attempting to substitute what nature itself had concentrated in Saskatchewan. Export routes had already weakened. European access through Lithuania had been blocked since sanctions intensified following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Even after sanctions were lifted, industry analysts projected that restoring Belarusian potash to global relevance would require 3 to 5 years, far longer than the entire USMCA review period, longer than a potential second Trump term, and beyond any electoral cycle in which reliance on Canadian potash could be politically managed without triggering major disruptions in American agriculture. Simply put, no practical substitute existed on any timeline that mattered. This operational reality was clearly communicated to the Trump administration in March and April 2025 by the United States Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy, the National Security Council, and the Office of the United States Trade Representative. There was no alternative supply capable of replacing Canadian potash at the volumes U.S. farmers demanded on the schedule they required without jeopardizing the financial viability of corn, soybean, wheat, and cotton production. These crops are not abstract statistics. They form the core political base of the Republican Party in roughly a dozen states. From Iowa to Texas, Ohio to Mississippi, regions with significant corn, soybean, wheat, or cotton output are dominated by Republican-leaning farm populations, many of whom supported Donald Trump in 2024 by margins exceeding 20 points. Every one of these states has at least one Republican senator whose primary political constituency includes farm cooperatives purchasing potash directly from Canadian distributors. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa was the first to publicly demand that the Trump administration reverse the initial 25% tariff on potash. Within days, the entire Republican Farm State Caucus warned that maintaining such a tariff would, according to multiple Senate offices, inflict political damage far greater than any potential bilateral leverage with Canada. The administration's 5-week reversal reflected the uncontainable political cost. That episode is the moment Mark Carney's negotiating posture became evident, not because he played any direct role in the potash tariff sequence. Carney assumed office in March 2025 during the midst of the walkback. The structural reality reflected by that reversal was already fixed. The U.S. agricultural economy's dependency on Canadian potash is geological, not policy-driven, and it cannot be reversed in less than 10 to 15 years. Potash, as a commodity, is thus structurally immune to sustained tariff escalation. The political price paid by Republican senators in farm states consistently outweighs any negotiating benefit the White House might claim in using potash as leverage. That hierarchy of dependence has remained unchanged since March 2025. The December sequence offers the clearest evidence of this structural pattern. On December 8, 2025, Donald Trump held an Oval Office event where he announced a $12 billion emergency relief fund in response to a reporter's question. At the same time, he warned he might impose, in his exact words, very severe tariffs on Canadian fertilizer if necessary. He made no mention of whether domestic production could feasibly replace Canadian supply within any commercially relevant timeline. That same day, William Pellerin, a partner at the international trade law firm Macmillan in Toronto, told BNN Bloomberg that imposing tariffs on Canada, the primary potash supplier, would directly raise costs for American farmers. The following day, Matt Simpson, CEO of Brazil Potash, reiterated to the same network that such tariffs would inevitably pass prices onto U.S. farmers. 2 consecutive days, 2 industry experts, same conclusion. Tariffs on Canadian potash do not pressure Canada. They burden American agriculture. The cost is absorbed by the customer, not the supplier. Saskatchewan production has no global competitor capable of matching the necessary volume. The significance of these statements lies in who made them. Pellerin and Simpson are independent of Carney's Canadian government. Pellerin is a Toronto-based international trade lawyer. Simpson leads a Brazilian potash company competing globally with Canadian producers, yet both highlighted the same inescapable truth. Operational realities make substitution impossible. Even a Brazilian potash CEO acknowledged that U.S. tariffs on Canadian potash harm American farmers. That marked the moment the structural debate ceased being hypothetical. Competitors confirmed that replacement on any meaningful timeline simply does not exist. 3 weeks later, the Trump administration finalized the Belarus sanctions deal. The reasoning was straightforward. If U.S. producers could not replace Saskatchewan in a meaningful timeframe, then Belarusian producers, once sanctions were lifted, could be presented as a viable alternative. The move signaled to American farmers and Republican senators in farm states that the White House was attempting to build substitution capacity, But the timeline remained 3 to 5 years to achieve commercial relevance, far beyond the USMCA review window and longer than a second Trump term. This brings us to the spring 2026 planting season. Farmers are facing the highest fertilizer costs in roughly 3 years. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the price index for fertilizers rose from 139.9 in mid-2024 to 149.9 by June 2025. Fertilizer drove an 11% increase in overall input costs for crop farmers during this period. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis import price index for chemical fertilizers climbed from 164.5 in December 2024 to 186.5 in September 2025. The costs flowed directly to farmers, forcing Republican farm state senators to pressure a reversal. The structural pattern had already set in. According to the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute at the University of Missouri, net farm income is projected to drop by more than $30 billion in 2026. Soybean growers, per the American Soybean Association, are enduring their third consecutive year of losses. Even with $40 billion in government farm payments in 2025, American agriculture is functioning under structurally compressed margins. This is the economic backdrop against which the Trump administration is approaching the USMCA review on July 1st, 2026. Potash cannot serve as a bargaining tool. The previous attempt triggered immediate revolt from Republican senators and required a 5-week walkback. Domestic substitution strategies remain on a 5 to 15-year horizon, while the Belarusian alternative requires a 3 to 5-year ramp-up. On the Canadian front, Mark Carney is maintaining strict strategic restraint. He is not threatening export controls, nor is he endorsing previous suggestions from Doug Ford to use potash exports as leverage in USMCA negotiations. That stance is deliberate, reflecting the structural reality. Canada's position is secure, and any attempt to weaponize potash is unnecessary. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, a conservative aligned with the Saskatchewan Party rather than Mark Carney's Liberals, has openly rejected turning potash exports into a political tool. Nutrien is moving forward with commercial expansion via a new export terminal in Washington state, a choice that has frustrated Canadian politicians who would have preferred British Columbia. Yet this decision represents a long-term commitment to U.S. customers, regardless of bilateral political friction. Canada is letting the geological reality dictate outcomes. Saskatchewan is letting the geology do the work. Nutrien is letting the natural endowment drive operations. Carney's administration, the provincial government, and the dominant private sector producer have all converged on the same operational stance. Continue exports as normal, avoid escalation, resist politicization, and let the structural dependence on Canadian potash uphold the negotiating position on its own. This is the clearest version of a negotiating posture, observed across the 17-month trade war, because it demands no public confrontation, no retaliation, no announcements. It relies solely on Canadian producers maintaining sales of potash to American buyers at commercial prices, while the U.S. political apparatus absorbs the consequences of any disruption attempts. This structural lock was tested by Donald Trump in March 2025 and proved unbreakable within 5 weeks. In the sequence I have been tracking, this is Domino 18, lumber, dairy, Alberta, alcohol, tourism, Lutnick, Greer, Columbia River, medical isotopes, the entry fee, Manitoba, LNG, the Canada Strong Fund, the Gordie Howe Bridge, Federal Register bypass, Shell Arc, Detroit Big 3 refunds, Mohammed bin Salman's phone call, and finally, the structural lock on Canadian potash. 18 dominoes across 17 months. By April 2026, the absence of escalation in any specific commodity flow has become the operational signal of negotiation dynamics. Potash has not been escalated because it cannot be. The geological reliance of the U.S. agricultural economy on Saskatchewan supply is written into the operational language of trade. It is an asymmetric vulnerability that cannot be closed on any commercially meaningful timeline. This demonstrates what it looks like when a negotiating posture functions without public theater. Carney did nothing. Moe did nothing. Nutrien did nothing. The geology did the work. The Republican Senate caucus from farm states enforced the limit. The pass-through of fertilizer costs did the work. Corn and soybean cooperatives carried it through. And the structural dependence held. Now, looking ahead to the spring and summer of 2026, there are 3 core scenarios. Scenario 1, probability. 20%, the Trump administration recognizes potash is off limits for tariffs and adjusts the USMCA negotiating approach accordingly. The July 1st review proceeds with sectoral tariffs on lumber, dairy, steel, and aluminum, while potash is explicitly exempted. American farmers continue to face structurally high fertilizer costs, but no escalation occurs. Bilateral relations stabilize on a lower structural equilibrium, formally acknowledging Canadian potash as a strategic, non-tariffable commodity. This is the optimistic path. I assign 20% because nothing in the administration's behavior over the past 3 months suggests it could publicly concede an entire commodity category is untouchable. Scenario 2, probability 55%, is the most likely. The Trump administration maintains the December-style rhetorical cycle, periodic threats of severe potash tariffs, followed by walkbacks. The threats never translate into operational escalation because the Republican Farm State Senate caucus blocks any sustained action within 72 hours. By the time the USMCA review reaches July 1st, potash remains untouched. The structural exemption persists by default. Farmers continue paying elevated fertilizer prices, yet the supply chain holds firm. By the end of 2026, reliance on Canadian potash will be a politically acknowledged reality of the U.S. agricultural economy, a fact no future administration can credibly challenge without triggering the same 5-week reversal experienced multiple times under Trump. Scenario 3, probability 25%, involves acceleration. Frustrated by the structural lock, the administration announces a comprehensive critical minerals tariff regime including potash, uranium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements simultaneously. Potash is hidden within a broader commodity package to complicate political pushback. Yet resistance emerges anyway. The Republican Farm State Senate caucus blocks potash tariffs, while the other commodities face tariffs that drive structural decoupling between Canadian and American supply chains. By year-end, North America's integrated critical mineral network is measurably realigned, with Canadian production redirected toward Asia, Europe, and Saudi Arabia at higher volumes than in 2024. The resulting increase in fertilizer costs damages the U.S. agricultural economy, a reality reflected in midterm election outcomes. Escalation eventually slows, but the realignment is permanent. 3 potential paths: the USMCA review window, a single mineral, 1 Canadian province, 6 underground mines, and 87% of every kilogram of potash used by American farmers in 2025. One Canadian Prime Minister, by choosing a posture of deliberate inaction, leverages the deepest geological asymmetry in the bilateral relationship, maintaining a negotiating line no public confrontation could hold as effectively. Donald Trump attempted to replace Canadian potash in March 2025, again in April, and again in December with a $12 billion emergency aid package for the same farmers his tariffs would have hurt. He tried the Belarusian sanctions deal, the Michigan potash loan acceleration, the Utah Sage potash grant. Every attempt yielded the same operational reality. There is no replacement. The Devonian salt beds were deposited 900 million years ago in central North America, precisely where they remain. They cannot be moved, replicated, or substituted on any timeline relevant to U.S. agriculture. Geological reality is negotiating reality, and the negotiating reality is simple. Mark Carney does not need to threaten, weaponize, or politicize Canadian potash. He must only allow it to flow at commercial prices, while the U.S. system absorbs the consequences of disruption. Every test by the Trump administration has shown these consequences to be politically uncontainable. The trade war spans many fronts, but the potash front has been quietly resolved since spring 2025, not through Canadian retaliation, Carney's rhetoric, Moe's provincial leadership, or Nutrien's commercial strategy, but by the geology of central North America. This province alone contains the largest concentration of potash reserves in human history, rendering every American corn, soybean, wheat, or cotton farmer structurally dependent on a single source for the next 10 to 15 years. Donald Trump tried to replace Canada's potash. What he discovered stopped him cold. The decisions are now being made. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.